So it's been about 1 week since the Stranger Things version of Vecna hit the PCB servers, and honestly, I don't really have that many complaints about his power. I think the only thing I would change at this time would be the cooldown on the Vine attacks, because getting hit with a constant barrage of them is a little bit annoying and frustrating to go against. But again, for the most part, I don't really have that many complaints. I think the Vine attack is honestly, jukeable. I think you can counter it by just predicting what the killer is going to do with it. But I also think that there's a lot of concerns with his power in the sense of him kind of operating like a Nurse 2.0. And I definitely hear those complaints and I hear those concerns, but I don't really know if I understand or agree with them, because I think his power just functions in a different way than most standard killers, but it also functions in a different way from Nurse. So I think he's kind of a league of his own in the way he functions, if that makes any sense. One comparison I can make with Nurse and Vecna is that they both basically ignore pallet loops. Vecna's power allows him to attack survivors from afar, so line of sight isn't really a determining factor in that. And also, objects and walls as well, because with how his power works, he just attacks survivors from underneath their feet, and that's obviously a lot different than some other killers in the past. And I think the other comparison between Vecna and Nurse is the way his Vine attacks are able to be aimed. It functions similar as a Nurse blinking, so you're able to kind of see the distance and how far it will go and everything. The only other comparison I could think of really is that Vecna has the ability to traverse the upside down, which allows him some decent mobility. He's able to travel across the map and, pop up underneath survivors as well. But there really is a cooldown to that ability in particular. The Vine attacks are really the main thing, and the only thing that is kind of similar to Nurse's blinking. Nurse is just much more deadly, in my opinion. I think Vecna is kind of able to rival her, but I think the difference is that Nurse is just simply able to disobey the laws of physics entirely. So if you're able to know exactly where survivors are, you really shouldn't have any problems as Nurse. Vecna still has to kind of guess where people are going to run and make a lot of predictions with how survivors will function with their movement, like if a survivor will lock themselves into an animation with like vaulting a window or something, which is thus why I think there's more counterplay available for a survivor when playing against Vecna. Now, does it mean that Vecna will be a weak killer? No, absolutely not. I think Vecna will still be high up there in the tiers. I think the problem is that a lot of people are quick to jump to these scary conclusions about how strong or weak a killer will be, even though it's still the PTB. I think we have to assume that the devs will make some changes to his power potentially, because I think they almost always do, but I really hope they don't really make any changes. I actually would prefer if they just send him to live as is, because I think if they make any changes to his Vine attack cooldown, for example, they will end up compensating that with something else. And I think if you end up buffing like the radius of the circles for the Vine attacks, that could possibly make a situation where we end up having a Nurse 2.0. Because if those circles end up being too large and have much too big of a radius, then it becomes unavoidable as a survivor, and then you kind of lose a lot of the counterplay and ability to do anything in a chase. And I think that's where it gets similar to Nurse. I think Vecna's lethality is definitely high, similar to Nurse's, but I think the way they function is still very different. I think at the end of the day, if you gave me a choice between going against a Nurse or a Vecna, I would definitely choose a Vecna, because I feel like I can actually juke his power and possibly predict and outplay what he's going to do. And I think there's just more potential for fun there than there is to go against something like a Nurse. And it is still early, obviously. PTB just happened, so Vecna could get sent to live servers and something happens and he ends up being way stronger than even I predicted myself. I think PTBs are always difficult to get a good true test on how strong some killers are. I remember the Krausu PTB, there was just a lot of messiness with how people played her, and I think people thought she was going to be kind of underpowered, but then the devs ended up buffing her too much when she was sent to live, and then she was basically the biggest, strongest killer in the game, probably stronger than Nurse and probably more oppressive than Nurse in some cases as well. But now she's in kind of a better spot, but still not the most fun to go against. And I think that's kind of where Vecna is as well right now. He's in a very decent spot, but if they make any changes, you risk disrupting things too much, and then you have something that just gets out of hand very quickly. So if I had it my way, I think the best choice is to make no changes to Vecna and just send him to live and just see how it goes. But yeah, that's about it. I should note this PTB B-roll I have going was a 5-gen chase on the PTB. It's nothing really that impressive. It's just a PTB, but it is, I think, something that I thought was fun. So yep, that's it. Thanks for watching.